The Wall Street Journal has recently published an article by Rainer Zittelmann, who is a free marketer, who is a proponent of capitalism, or at least seems to be. He's written things like The Origins of Poverty and Wealth, where he goes around the world and explores basically what allows some nations to prosper. He also wrote In Defense of Capitalism, Debunking the Myths, and How Nations Escape Poverty. So we have this really sort of, at least at the face of it, really free market sort of person. And he wrote a relatively short article. We'll be able to go through the whole thing, where the title is The Ayn Rand Contradiction. And he sees a contradiction in Ayn Rand. And I think the article is really revealing of both what the current free market movement is lacking, mainly morality, and also what really needs to happen before Ayn Rand can really gain footing, as well as a lot of, I think, real dichotomies people still have, even in today's age, when it comes to sort of, let's say, it's not your emotional and your reasonable side, but your integrated side. People still view humans as a disintegrated beings of two or three different souls. And I think that is very revealing in specifically this article. Joining me today is James. Hey, James. Anything you'd like to say, not specifically from the article, because we'll go in a second, but anything you'd like to say before we go in?
Well, this is the very typical stuff we've heard in criticism of Ayn Rand for many decades now. They just get her philosophy wrong, if they this and her life wrong, and they engage in ad hominem in the process. That is so it follows the standard pattern. But if this were submitted as a paper about Ayn Rand's ideas in a university classroom, for example, it would be a failing grade. It would be a zero or an F. Because it displays such cosmic ignorance as it almost has no clue what Ayn Rand was about as a philosopher. If he'd cracked a single book of Ayn Rand's, he would have seen that he's failing to address something that Ayn Rand had addressed in detail. So, for example, in 1957, when Atlas Shrugged first came out, the conservative publication, National Review, published a review written by Whittaker Chambers, who said that Ayn Rand was advocating forthright materialism. Now, if you can read Atlas Shrugged and say it's forthright materialism, you've missed the whole book. The whole book is about how that is a false dichotomy, materialism versus idealism, that sort of thing. It is about the integration of mind and body. It's not about defending materialism unless you already come from a Christian, mystical, idealist type perspective. Then and only then, if you're an ex-communist, which was true of Whittaker Chambers, he was living in a world of a false dichotomy, could not imagine anyone even addressing it. And Ayn Rand stands on her head, addresses it again and again and again explicitly. That's a false dichotomy. And if you don't address even the idea that Ayn Rand is talking about it, now you might disagree with her about the integration that she's talking about, but at least you discuss that she was about the integration. So similarly here, morality and emotion for this guy is on one side, and reason and logic is over here on this side. And if you say it's a contradiction, without even mentioning that Ayn Rand said it wasn't a contradiction, she had arguments against it being a contradiction. More basically, her appeals to emotion. She wrote nonfiction. There's an introduction to objectivist epistemology has no appeals to emotion in it. It is a straight nonfiction book on epistemology. Similarly, her work on ethics, even her work on ethics. But again, he lumps ethics into this, it's got to be a world of emotion and subjectivity, and it's way over here versus logic and reason and science, which is over here. But if that were your observation, you'd have to say, well, Ayn Rand addressed that contradiction. Ayn Rand addressed that dichotomy. She believed it was a false dichotomy. This was her argument for why there isn't an inherent dichotomy. No, he just assumes the dichotomy, imputes it to Ayn Rand. That is a cosmically ignorant thing. It doesn't even begin to understand Ayn Rand's ideas. It ignores massive parts of her work. Because she was an artist, obviously she's just appealing to emotion. Now, anyone who reads Atlas Shrugged knows that you're going to come across this big speech by Galt, which is, it's got emotional aspects to it, but it's a long, serious, philosophically substantive book. So no, it's an F paper using American grading standards on Ayn Rand. It is cosmically misleading. It is false on the face of it. It's bad scholarship. It's worse than bad scholarship. It doesn't begin to address the very issue he raised.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to sort of the litmus test for have you read Ayn Rand or have you tried to understand? My favorite thing is, the first thing to check, have they read the first page of The Virtue of Selfishness? Because for those who read it, on the first page, Ayn Rand explains both why she uses selfishness in the book, and so why she defends it, and also how she defines it. So if somebody is already sort of misunderstanding that, or sort of trying to misrepresent that, it tells me either you're actively trying to misrepresent Ayn Rand's ideas, or you didn't even bother to read
Well,
the
that's
first page.
it. He either doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, in which case he shouldn't be publishing an article on it, or he has an inkling of it and he's outright lying. You would have to address the fact that Ayn Rand was talking about what he calls a contradiction as a false dichotomy. He doesn't even raise the issue, which is so central to her thought. Central to Ayn Rand's thought was eliminating these false dichotomies, refuting these false dichotomies, showing that there is an answer that integrates immorality and reason. There is no Izzat problem for her. See, he doesn't even begin to address the substance of her ideas. So it goes right over his head. So what objectivism is not discussed. He doesn't lay a finger on objectivism because he doesn't define it properly. He brings his assumptions to the table and just imputes them to Ayn Rand. That is an F paper on Ayn Rand as such.
And we'll go through the article shortly, and you'll see a few things which I'd like Google search away to even be sort of proved differently, which says a lot. But it sort of reminds me, because when we do these shows or when I prepare for a topic, something I always like to do is come up with arguments against it, or search up and arguments against the positions I'm holding. Not only because to make my argument stronger, but also if somebody who doesn't have my context of knowledge watches our video and then, let's say, sees a response to our video, and I haven't addressed like the first thing they would come up with, I've done a bad job. I haven't really covered this topic. I haven't really provided even the basic sort of refutal of like the first thing that would come up if somebody asks. I think that there should definitely be like a title for this, or like a debate sort of fallacy that's going on here. Just I'll just do a quick sort of thing that I've seen recently. For those who know Dave Ramsey, he's like a sort of like a personal finance guru, and he did one show about basically how much I think basically how much people should expect to like gain in the stock market, and he the way he explained it, he like didn't cover the first thing somebody would have a problem with the way he was talking about. And from that, while I was watching the video, I was like, okay, you're making a point, but I already have one argument against your thing, and you're not even covering it. So there is no point in like covering this. And
he ignores the essence of objectivism. Can you imagine someone coming along and saying, well, Thomas Aquinas was no different, just thinking of another philosopher. Thomas Aquinas was really just an expression of Christianity, and you don't mention the influence of Aristotle. You would miss the essence of Thomas Aquinas. It would be like saying, well, Thomas Aquinas is just, your run-of-the-mill typical Christian thinker, little different from Augustine or, later theologians, John Calvin or something. No, you can't. If you don't discuss Aristotle's influence on Aquinas, you're missing Aquinas, the essence of Aquinas. Similarly, it's this kind of cosmic ignorance. He's failing to miss the central point of Atlas Shrugged, say, right, which is about the role of the mind in human existence. It's addressing the reason-emotion dichotomy. For something like for Ayn Rand, it's her theory of art is romantic realism, and so for her, there's not a reason-emotion dichotomy that makes any appeal to emotion inherently an irrational thing. Now, if it's an appeal to emotion on logic, Of course, that's a fallacy. He doesn't make that distinction. Ayn Rand makes that distinction. And he misformulates her position on the relationship between reason and emotion in any event. It's a misformulation of the procedure. And then, of course, like most contemporary discussions of Ayn Rand, it's a ad hominem. They go into her biography inaccurately, focused on non-essentials about her philosophy, false things about her philosophy, and that I think stems from the Brandons, which is why I wrote my first book about the Brandons. He uses Anne Heller, the biographer, quotes her several times. Anne Heller is dependent on the Brandons. Anne Heller told me herself that my book should cause a complete evaluation of the Brandons' biographies and their credibility, something she never actually did. I think she was just blowing wind up my something. And but on the other hand, she completely relies on total crap and falsehood and things out of context in an ad hominem attack, and an ad hominem attack on objectivist cult-like following of emotionally devoted dogmatists. Yeah, that's the way I would describe Ayn Rand's students, you know, like Leonard Peikoff getting his PhD in philosophy, Ed Locke talking, you know, Edwin Locke's recent book on free will. Obviously, it's just an appeal to emotion. There's nothing of philosophical substance here. That's the implication. And you know, those emotionalist hippie types that Ayn Rand inspired her original students, you know, like Leonard Peikoff and Alan Greenspan. They were just emotionalist hippies going, by and cult. I mean, that's the other thing. Apart from some basic principles of objectivism, objectivists disagree about a great many things. It's like herding cats sometimes, trying to get objectivists to agree just on a political campaign. Much less anything else, or some work of art. Ayn Rand's basic philosophy, its central proposition is think, think for yourself, which is a redundancy in her philosophy. So the idea of bringing up a cult is an ad hominem on anyone who admires Ayn Rand, and again, without misstating and ignoring the essence of her ideas. It is that bad. I mean, it's worse than worthless. It's misleading and designed to get people to mistrust Ayn Rand. I mean, he doesn't even understand. I mean, he tries to, as you point out, he's a free marketer, but he doesn't even understand Ayn Rand's power in terms of, and he admits Ayn Rand has been more popular than most of the other defenders of the free market in the 20th century, or something like a free market in the 20th century. Doesn't even begin to understand Rand's power, something he even acknowledges.
We have a super chat from Wes, thank you so much, and a super chat from Bonnie, thank you so much. So let's go to the actual article. So again, the Ayn Rand contradiction on Wall Street Journal. It starts with, she revered reason but spent her career appealing to emotion. That's the subtitle. Now going to the article. Few have championed capitalism as unreservedly as Ayn Rand, born Elisa Rosenbaum on February 2nd, 1905. Her 1957 novel Atlas Shrugged has sold more than 10 million copies. Milton Friedman's 1962 book Capitalism and Freedom has sold about 1 million. What is the secret of her success? Unlike the economists Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, and Friedman, Rand is best known for her novels. Her cultural significance comes not from her powers of rationality, but rather her appeals to morals and emotions. At the same time, she steadfastly believed in the supremacy of reason and thought emotions were valid, only when they were rooted in logic. And I already want to start here. I mean, we've basically covered it, but here you see the separation, the dichotomy between emotions and reason, pretty strict. Like, you see it right here. I mean, again, like, appeals to morals and emotions when it comes to Atlas Shrugged. I mean, it's a book of fiction. I mean, with anything, first it's gonna touch touch your feelings, the ideas you've already had in your mind from before. You're already some form of integrations that are happening, and you're going to get emotional about it. But the idea that, I mean, if you ever, if you, it's not like every single person that reads Atlas Shrugged automatically becomes an objectivist, we would have 10 million objectivists, I think we would be doing pretty nicely. It's you see something there, you get some sort of emotional, but it still requires reason. It still requires mind to understand why your emotions are sort of why you are being emotional about this book. It requires reason to understand that.
If it's the
But
same old values, you're not going to get people to be emotional about it, except, by appealing straightly to those emotions. Artists could do that before. Ayn Rand had a whole new approach to morality and values, and the relationship between fact and value, between reason and emotion, between art and reason. And if you're going to bring it up like that, then it's incumbent on you to roll up your sleeves and discuss Ayn Rand's answer to that. Reading this, you'd have no idea that Ayn Rand had a complex, well-developed answer to exactly this question. In bringing up the issue like that and not addressing what Atlas Shrugged says about that, or what her other work says about that, is just pig ignorance. It is total stupidity. It is ignorance on such a scale as to make this unpublishable, unless someone really is trying to deceive you in a way. So this really can't be explained by ignorance, because anyone cracking a book like Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand by Leonard Peikoff would understand that Ayn Rand had a well-developed argument. Ayn Rand had students who she had influence on psychology because she understood the relationship uniquely between reason and emotion, between cognition, values, and what our emotions are. It's not touched at all here. Or between Ayn Rand on all these false dichotomies. If you're going to raise this contradiction, you would have to say, for Ayn Rand, it wasn't a contradiction, and at least give me an indication why Ayn Rand did not think it was a contradiction. But for him, it is axiomatic. The dichotomy, the false dichotomy, is so embedded in his mind that he can't even imagine. It's not even worth considering. No one even should discuss or look into it. But even though a central thrust of Atlas Shrugged is to cut through all of these false dichotomies Ayn Rand thought was false. Instead, he's wallowing in false dichotomies, insisting that they're true, and pretends as though you would never get the idea that Ayn Rand had a complex argument against a reason-emotion dichotomy, and that she believed, yes, you could inspire emotions, but the heroes in her books are unlike any other hero you'll read in any other fiction. What makes that so? Because she developed a new morality. A new morality she will explain in philosophically substantive speeches and the plot of those novels. You can't just have an emotional reaction for Ayn Rand and that be what you're going on. You've got to understand the unique idea that she's bringing, the profound philosophical truth and insight and innovation she's making, even to be emotionally moved by it. That's the power of Ayn Rand. She's integrating the two. She's giving you a powerful response based on something you've not maybe considered before, a kind of hero you've never read in literature before. So just awful. It is an F paper because it doesn't begin to address Ayn Rand's ideas. Ayn Rand had complex ideas on this very point, and he acts as though they don't even exist. So we can just continue merrily along, assuming something different than something that Ayn Rand argued about without even mentioning those arguments.
Yeah, to give both people and the author of the article some recommendations, I recommend for this part the Objectivist Ethics essay in The Virtue of Selfishness, where Ayn Rand talks about emotions as well as in many other places, but this is the one place to go. If the person actually read something before, maybe he would have known that. But let's continue. Actually, I want to mention the second part of that statement, because he also says Ayn Rand thought that emotions were valid only when they were rooted in logic. And now here, I'm not sure what exactly he even means by that. Like, if let's say you have emotions that are going against reason, are going against logic, are you saying you shouldn't like look into what's happening here? Like, if let's say if you see a kitten get someone kicks a kitten and you're happy because of it, or you smile, it's like, oh no, that's okay, it's just your emotions? Or shouldn't you be, what's happening here, Jesus?
Yeah,
Like, Yeah.
He has no clue. I mean, think about it. Ayn Rand would not have approached it that way. She didn't think of emotions as valid or invalid, right? Logic can be valid or invalid. Cognition can be true or false. It can have an objective methodology or a non-objective methodology. Emotions are automatic results of evaluations that we have subconsciously automatized in ourselves. So Ayn Rand had a theory of emotion and its relationship to cognition, and you'd never get that clue. Nor would Ayn Rand evaluate you for your emotions. They're outside the realm of moral evaluation as far as Ayn Rand is concerned. And since they are not arguments, they're even outside the realm of validity in the sense that logic can be valid or invalid. It's as though that doesn't even exist within Ayn Rand's thought. There have been a number of psychologists and psychotherapists that Ayn Rand has influenced. Like I say, one of the most widely cited academic theorists of psychology, Edwin Locke, was a student of Ayn Rand's. He's written on free will, motivational psychology, educational issues. Now, you'd think that if someone had that kind of an impact in the realm of psychology, both psychotherapy and in theoretical psychology, well, there's something here I need to investigate. He doesn't even investigate it. He assumes his false dichotomy, he assumes it's the truth, and ignores the fact that Ayn Rand gave considerable attention to that very point without addressing it. As you would never even get a hint that Ayn Rand had addressed this point. So again, this is rotten scholarship. It would be like saying ignoring the influence of Aristotle and discussing Thomas Aquinas. That's how bad it is.
Now, continuing with the article, Anne C. Haller, author of 2010 biography, Ayn Rand and the World She Made, points out this contradiction. Whether she knew it or, now quoting, whether she knew it or not, she was...
That's where it kills me, whether Ayn Rand knew it or not. Ayn Rand had arguments on that point. So Ann Heller and this guy give a big fat F. Ann Heller wrote a miserable biography. Okay,
just to finish the quote,
yes.
Whether she knew it or not, she was retailing her philosophy of strict rationality through a primal emotional appeal by characters in a fable.
Primal emotion. I wish that the emotions that Ayn Rand has informed in me were primal to all people. They are not. A lot of people come away hating it. What explains the different emotional reactions to reading The Fountainhead? Because people will have some people will say, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever, most profoundly emotionally moving thing I've ever read. Some people will say, this is evil, this is awful, this is rotten writing. I hated it. I hated the hero. If it's primal and automatic, what explains the differences? Ayn Rand has an explanation for that, but he doesn't even suggest to you that Ayn Rand might have an explanation for that.
Continuing, Rand was likely aware of this incongruity, according to Ms. Heller.
And aware of it as an incongruity? Now he's really adding his ignorance and stupidity upon ignorance and stupidity.
Continuing, according to Ms. Heller, while promoting her 1943 novel The Fountainhead, Rand explained to a businessman that novels moved people emotionally first and intellectually second. This, she said, made them the most compelling kind of propaganda. Now, here I would just like to point out maybe a slight dishonesty with the use of propaganda, because the way it's used sort of in modern language usually means either something that's not true or something you're trying to sort of make up to sort of put something false or potentially false ahead, while the actual definition of propaganda, or the way at least I believe Ayn Rand would have used it, I think she wouldn't have said, yeah, we have to lie to people to like get ideas across.
No, she used it in a neutral way. Propaganda can either be true and for a good cause, or false and for a bad cause. Now I know there's a use of it that's negative, and Ayn Rand wouldn't have died on the definitional hill of what the word propaganda meant, but she meant it in a neutral, ideologically neutral way. Just the systematic advocacy, public advocacy of an idea.
Yeah, but again, sort of here the emotional slash reason or mind and body dichotomy, the idea that moved people emotionally first and intellectually second. I mean, it's really hard to do the opposite with the novel. It's really hard to like unless you have something that is non-fiction, which there is in a sense almost nothing emotional. Which even in with non-fiction, sort of emotional, something like oh this sort of you know it's like the emotions are so like quick, are so immediate that your sort of your logic will in a sense lag behind. That doesn't mean yeah, basically emotions are the first thing
Right.
you'll get.
What Ayn
uh
Rand means is that, look, I'm going to give you a humanitarian, and you're going to start getting a bad feeling about this humanitarian. I'm going to show you someone who's independent and, in a sense, quite selfish. And so, but you're going to get a very positive feeling about not only his independence, but his selfishness on this point. So, what Ayn Rand is doing is giving you, it's true that art is a powerful way of putting it all together. And art is a way of appealing to people's values and getting them to rethink their values in an important way. And if you agree with her ideas, it is a great motivational way of looking at those ideas. For Ayn Rand, yes, she was an artist, and she was, in one sense, not in the logical sense, appealing to emotion to stimulate thought, to get you to see the values and the moral thought and the philosophy behind it. And so Ayn Rand was bridging the emotion reason gap there in a very explicit way. And again, this is totally misleading to quote Ayn Rand out of context like that. Yes, a work of art is going to appeal to more people, and it's going to have a bigger, more profound impact if you can tie it into their values. If they do have an emotional response to it, absolutely. Emotions are transmitted in part by values are transmitted in part by values. But Ayn Rand didn't think values were primal, that emotions were primal. He just assumed some kind of instinctive primal nature to people. A caveman would react to the fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged the same way anyone else would, which is obviously absurd on the face of it.
we have a super chat from Robert, thank you so much. Now continuing with the article, where are we? Oh, there we go. Rand's followers revered her. Some worshipped her and regarded her as a superhuman figure who embodied strict rationality. I mean, just a quick. I mean, no, we have to talk about it. Because again, this view of reason as infallible or basically omniscience. I mean, something I mentioned to James before we went live. Basically, unless you bought Bitcoin in 2011, you're not an actual objectivist because you didn't make like like omnisciently like perfect decision on like a specific thing. Like people can make mistakes. You can especially you can't, or it's really hard to be in sort of the state of focus like 100% always. Sometimes something happens, you make a mistake, but you always have a chance to look back and sort of correct your mistakes or sort of look at. And but this idea that Ayn Rand views objectivist or ideal man as some sort of like infallible in yeah, basically like someone who will never make mistakes or is yeah, I don't know, I don't even want to call it perfect because that's not even perfection. That's completely out of this world imagining a person like that.
Well, and he misses the essence of the novels. Forget the rest of her. Forget her nonfiction work, of which he appears to be completely unaware. It misunderstands her novels. Even her great heroes like Howard Rourke and John Galt learn. They discover things. And more than that, her heroes are in conflict. Her good guys are in conflict. And so many of her virtuous people need to learn an important lesson about philosophy or the world. Dominique Franken, Hank Rearden, Dagny Taggart. I can go right down through the list. The essential conflicts in Ayn Rand's novels are between the good guys, between the heroes, not so much as between the bad guys and the good guys, but between people who have, to the extent that they have something good, virtuous going for themselves. This even includes a guy who doesn't turn out, spoiler alert, turn out perfect, but has some virtue, like Gail Wynand or something. Ayn Rand found that kind of thing. The discovery arc, even of her heroes, is what's interesting. The conflict between good guys is what's interesting to Ayn Rand. So again, it's cosmic ignorance. And the other thing on that comment, I have never read, not once, someone who said Ayn Rand was perfect, Ayn Rand was godlike, Ayn Rand never made mistakes. Leonard Peikoff, the strongest advocate of Ayn Rand among her students, even in his biographical memoir of Ayn Rand, indicates that her anger could sometimes be unfair. Ayn Rand herself was imperfect. She was a human being. I have never read anything from an objectivist who said Ayn Rand is some kind of towering figure who never made a mistake. That is just false. He just made that up. He pulled that out of nowhere. There have been people who said Ayn Rand's a genius, Ayn Rand changed my life, but that's a very different proposition than saying that Ayn Rand was never to be questioned, because Ayn Rand, as you point out, said no one is infallible, no one's omniscient. Ayn Rand herself had a discovery arc in her life, and Ayn Rand made mistakes and admitted that she made mistakes in her life. So it is utterly bizarre, a complete ad hominem, and an ad hominem against Rand's followers. And as I say, there are a bunch of emotional appeals to emotionalists, like Leonard Peikoff or Alan Greenspan or Alan Gotthelf, Ayn Rand students who off to get their PhDs and to give dry nonfiction arguments. No, that is totally wrong. It completely ignores how Ayn Rand has inspired many philosophers who are engaged in serious academic, peer-reviewed work in their fields, philosophy, psychology, economics. So it is just a smear, and it is an ignorant smear on top of it. It's false.
Yeah, I'll only jump on one thing. Again, the idea, when people say something like, well, humans are not perfect, or Ayn Rand wasn't perfect, I think they really do still have this mind or this dichotomy between basically the ideal and what it sort of means in human life. Because again, perfection is not that I never make mistakes, or that I never sort of when it comes to sort of moral perfection or moral ideal, it doesn't mean you never make mistakes, you never do wrong things. I think when it comes to moral perfection, it would mean you never knowingly like do something that's bad. Something like stealing, I think, and we mean like actual stealing, not maybe in some specific circumstances, but like straight up, taking money from someone when you know you're stealing, you're doing something wrong, and you do it because, well, I just wanted the money or something.
Plenty of conscientious people make perfectly innocent mistakes. The question is, are you being conscientious? Are you trying to find out the truth? Are you being honest, as you point out, to yourself? And rational. Now, that's well, again, you see, he'd have to have cracked a book and understood Ayn Rand, maybe cracked a book on Ayn Rand's nonfiction, maybe looked into the work of Leonard Peikoff, and then he would have discovered, well, geez, Ayn Rand has a very complex answer to this, and one that I would at least, even if he disagreed with it, he would at least have to acknowledge that it was there. He would at least have to acknowledge that there was this argument, address the argument. If he wanted to try and refute it, try and refute it. But here he's pretending as though objectivism isn't what it really is. And the simplest bit of homework would have shown him that he just stepped on a very stupid landmine and at the end, because of that, totally misrepresents Ayn Rand as a thinker, as an artist, as a writer, as a philosopher, and as a human being.
Okay, there are two more points, which one I want you to cover, and second one I want to cover. So in the first one, he says, she was a heavy smoker who for years refused to acknowledge any link between smoking and lung cancer. James?
Again, not true. Ayn Rand was making an argument about causation, which I think is still true. I mean, people can live into their 90s and die of something other than lung cancer or emphysema and be smokers all their lives. The causal etiology is not necessary and sufficient. Now, there is a strong relationship between the two. More than that, Ayn Rand, when she herself had health problems, and perhaps she did make a mistake, perhaps she should have been more aware of the relationship between smoking and lung cancer. She did have part of a lung removed, but when she began to have lung issues, she quit it, and she quit it cold turkey. She wasn't wedded to smoking in the face of scientific evidence or personal experience. That, again, is false. And now, more than that, is that the essence of Ayn Rand's life? Is that the first thing you'd bring up when you talk about Ayn Rand? You wouldn't talk about her struggle as an artist, her work as a philosopher. You wouldn't discuss that. You wouldn't discuss, other things about Ayn Rand and her achievement. What you're going to do is you're going to focus on the fact that she smoked and had health problems because of it. Well, no, that's not the essence of Ayn Rand. And even there, he's stating it in a very misleading fashion. I would say even a false fashion. And it's an ad hominem on top of it. Let's say Ayn Rand was a hypocrite on that point about objectivity. Would that lay a finger on objectivism? No. If you claim it does, that's just the logical fallacy ad hominem. So it's stupid on so many levels. It's an ad hominem. It's an attack on her biographically, and it is a totally misleading attack based on non-essentials.
Another point, she sometimes wore a dollar sign pin in recognition of the heroes of Atlas Shrugged, who adopted a large dollar sign as a symbol of their capitalist movement. Yet, she chose not to invest her money in stocks. Most of her money was in a savings bank. And then he goes into another point. And I'll just mention sort of, again, this is something I've never heard before. And it's also like super weird because I think even factually, the fact that you would bring something like this, again, sort of idea of not investing, well, the need for investing has changed since the Fed has, since we have the Fed and the gold standard has been abolished. The fact was that hundreds of years ago, if you buried a gold coin in your garden and 100 years later you brought up, that gold coin would most likely purchase you the same amount of products. There was no need to invest. The only reason why you even need to invest in sort of modern way is because of the Fed's sort of policies. And
This is an
then
expression of this dichotomy that he can't get his hands around. Does Ayn Rand think that because you're an advocate of capitalism, you have to be an investor? Just as such. No, she doesn't. In Atlas Shrugged, or does her composer, does her medical doctor, are they investors? No. The fact that you're an investor, it does not follow from the fact that you're an advocate of capitalism if you're being cautious about your money. Ayn Rand was cautious about your money. As you point out, inflation was less of a problem, and she didn't need to, be as sophisticated. Today, you're right. In our mixed economy, we have to be more of an investor, and of course, we can't be irresponsible with our money. But it does not follow from the fact that you advocate capitalism that you're an investment wonk and that you're on the stock market every day, or that you're a day trader, or that you know exactly the right investments to go into. Ayn Rand was conservative about her money. Yeah, she was conservative about her money. Could she have perhaps made more money had she been an aggressive investor? Yeah, but that wasn't Ayn Rand. It would have been a waste of Ayn Rand's time. It would have been a waste of Ayn Rand's time to have put so much focus on investment. Ayn Rand died wealthy. She lived comfortably. She was very successful from the time of the Fountainhead forward. Ayn Rand really didn't have to worry about surviving anymore because she had a healthy income. A person like that can put their money into very conservative investments or savings accounts, which I understand Ayn Rand did do. But does that mean that you're not an objectivist hero? That every objectivist hero, because they wear a dollar sign, necessarily means that they're investment wonks. Now, of course, there are objectivists who are investment wonks, a great many of them, investment advisors, economists. Ayn Rand inspired a great many economists. But does it follow from the fact that you're an advocate of capitalism that you have to be an investment wonk if you're making a good living and know you have a good, healthy source of income? No, obviously not. That's ridiculous.
yeah,
Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand believed in all kinds of other things. Did she have to become she loved sculpture. She loved Rachmaninoff. Did she have to become a composer or a sculptor? That's insane.
Yeah, and again, yeah, I bet Howard Rock didn't even have 401k. I mean, again, again, even like S&P 500 index wasn't created until like 57. I mean, I have no idea how would you even go about investing in like 40s and 50s if you again didn't want to like spend a lot of time. Like it's much different now. Like it's so easy now the compared to like past, and it's such a weird point. Anyway, going to the next point. She was fascinated by airplanes, but she didn't fly until late in her life due to an irrational fear of crashing. I mean, do you
Well,
even say so?
that's just crazy false. You know, when Ayn Rand first took a commercial air flight, it was in the middle of the 20th century. Commercial air flights by ordinary people didn't become a commonplace until the 1950s and 60s. And it was in the early 1960s that Ayn Rand took her first flight. And the description of it is that when she did, you know, she was concerned about flying in the 20th century. Commercial air flight was just now becoming a commonplace for a lot of people. But when she took the flight, she was completely relaxed, thoroughly enjoyed herself, had a great time, and then flew several times more using commercial planes again. That does not describe a kind of fear of flying neurosis. In fact, it kind of describes to me someone who has a healthy attitude towards things. Am I concerned about doing something like flying in the middle of the 20th century for the first time? Yeah. But did she do it? Yeah. Was she relaxed and had a good time when she was flying, even for the first time? Yeah. And she did it again and again afterwards.
Yeah, and also someone brings it up in chat. Even if she had like phobia of flying, the idea that, you know, if you have a mental illness, you are not an objectivist. Like if you have
Right.
something like actually like physiological or sort of like mentally, you know, you have a problem. Like
Yeah.
that's like an actual diagnosable like thing you have a problem with. And the idea that, you know, now you're not rational unless, you know, that sort of that you have like an actual mental illness,
Right.
that you are beyond the
Bertrand
sort of
Russell
point
was
of,
a
yeah.
promiscuous dog who chased skirts and cheated on all his wives. Does that have any, would anyone bring up Bertrand Russell's promiscuous sexual history when discussing the substance of his philosophy? No, they don't. They do it for Ayn Rand. And the Brandons are the ones who liberated this. And it is an attack to discourage young people from reading Ayn Rand. See, she was this crazy lady. One, if it was a psychological issue, it would have no bearing on her philosophy or even her art, would it? Because in the Atlas Shrugged, obviously, her female heroine is an expert pilot. And so we see that happening. And she was fascinated and loved air, you know, the idea of air travel, but she didn't have a phobia. She was able to do it repeatedly in the middle of the 20th century and enjoy herself doing it. She wasn't even phobic that way. So it's ad hominem, yes. Two, it's false. And that's the kind of crap that constantly, and that's supposed to substitute for addressing the real issue of the relationship between reason and emotion, the relationship between art and philosophy. Now, Ayn Rand has a lot of substantive things to say about that, but you would never get a clue of that reading this. He just assumes the dichotomy, acts as though Ayn Rand didn't have any arguments against that. Even if he disagreed with it, he would have to have at least addressed it if it's going to be even a fair discussion of it. But here again, he resorts to ad hominem, the lowest form of cheap fallacy, and it's false on top of it all.
uh I'll bring it up again. Someone says, I have ADHD, and while I have struggles with focus and long-term thinking, I haven't lost all rational capacity. If you actually do have ADHD, get some like apparently sort of like, you know, getting like some drugs, like some like actual like medicine is the only way to really treat ADHD, from my understanding. So again, even when you have like a mental thing or sort of ADHD is not like a mental illness, but basically where you are sort of different than from the standard. It doesn't mean you're not capable of rationality, and also you should treat it, and then you'll be closer to, you know, sort of like normal. Like when you break a leg, you don't just say, well, that's it, I'm not human anymore. No, you go in and like treat that thing so you can't go back to sort of normalcy.
And it would be wrong to evaluate the poster's work. If he wrote a novel or if he wrote nonfiction, it would be total ad hominem for me to say, well, you know, he's got ADHD. And ADHD has to be borne in mind every time you read anything he says. No, we evaluate his work as a work. Otherwise, we're engaged in the fallacy of ad hominem. And a psychological problem is not his, or a physical problem, a physical illness is not, I don't care how we describe it, is not a moral issue. It doesn't make him morally inferior in any case.
Now
In the case
continuing.
of A Fear of Flying, for example, it's simply false about Ayn Rand. She enjoyed herself when she did fly.
Continuing, despite championing individualism, Rand generated a cult-like following. Though she was an atheist, some of her admirers have transformed her teachings into rigid dogma that demands conformism, something of a religion. I guess we can cover this point before continuing.
This is just insane. Leonard Peikoff says there's all kinds of moral options, psychological options, even. Ayn Rand wrote The Fountainhead. And the hero is a man who stands up against the whole world for his unique vision alone. The primary normative advice Ayn Rand gives in her philosophy is think for yourself. Now, that would be entirely unprecedented in the history of cults. It's cult suicide, obviously, the opposite of a cult when you go around telling people, think for yourself, be like Howard Rourke. No. And as I say, in reality, when it comes to Ayn Rand fans, apart from a few philosophical principles, which they generally agree with, they disagree about so many other things. Jazz, rock and roll, who to vote for in the next election, what to wear, is having a tattoo appropriate, etc. I've heard objectivists, it's like herding cats. They have opinions on so many different things. And when it comes to all of Ayn Rand's major students, those who published works, I have never, ever, ever read a single one of them saying, well, Ayn Rand was perfect. We have to go by just what Ayn Rand said and only what Ayn Rand said, because she could never have possibly made a mistake. Not one. They just pull it out of the sky and make it up.
Just a reminder, because I mentioned the ADHD, check with your doctor with anything. Don't just take the fact that I said it. But my understanding is specifically when it comes to ADHD, the so-called pharmacotherapy, or basically treating it with drugs, is the only sort of reliable way to sort of treat it as of right now. But again, check with, and also there are differences between what drugs work better for what person. So, don't take
I confess total ignorance on that point. I have no advice to give people on ADHD, whatever. I just wish them well and hope they do get the appropriate, whatever the treatment is, they get the appropriate help or work it out on their own. I have no idea what that is. That's a scientific question. Ayn Rand, is your point, but did not think that omniscience and infallibility were on the table for human beings at all, including herself. She said it repeatedly.
Yeah, I just think it's sort of important to, if there is, in a sense, something wrong with you, or if you think that you find a treatment for it. And, drug treatment, I don't think is any different than any sort of other medical treatment we have. So I think there is a certain maybe potential mind and body dichotomy when it comes to sort of treating mental illness or sort of mental differences, and when it comes to treating like body differences. Like nobody would say, well, don't take like penicillin. You should just feel better. You should just fix it by yourself.
Get over that infection all on your own. It might kill you, but get over it, right? Right.
Now, continuing with the article, she was a human with contradictions, strengths, and weaknesses. Which again, this is such a weird sentence. Like that's like the way he said it. Like that's every like human person. Like, or unless you are saying that like Ayn Rand was like different in some way. Like every person has strengths, weaknesses. I mean, contradictions is weird. The fact that you would say,
Contradiction, right. Yeah. Well, you see this contradiction, this reason emotion contradiction, this morality versus reason contradiction, this art versus rational science contradiction. He's loaded with false dichotomies that Ayn Rand has extensive argumentation against, that you would never imagine that Ayn Rand had argumentation against from reading him. So it's just rotten pig ignorance, misleading people. Either he doesn't know, didn't do his homework, didn't scratch the surface of Ayn Rand's work before publishing an article in the Wall Street Journal about it, or he is, as you point out, lying to people to scare young people away from reading Ayn Rand. That's all you can think. It's one of the two.
He continues, far from the flawless superhuman characters in her novels. I mean, we've already covered it. It's far from that. But again, if you don't read something, it's kind of hard to actually, properly identify what's going on there. But continuing, but we can still learn a lot from Rand. The historical evidence supporting capitalism is so convincing that it's difficult to understand why some people view it so negatively. In 1820, during the early stages of modern industrial capitalism, about 90% of the global population was living in extreme poverty. Today, that figure stands at less than 9%. I think it's great the fact that he acknowledges the fact that capitalism is the practical system. And when Ayn Rand gives the moral argument for it, he says, well, this, what is this? Whatever.
Appeal to primal emotions.
Yeah.
All those appeals to primal emotions that are for socialism. You read, those novels, a Dickens novel or a novel set in the Industrial Revolution, which casts the evil capitalist, greedy capitalist. Those are appeals to primal emotion, but based on values. Ayn Rand's appeal to emotions is based on a unique set of philosophical values you won't find anywhere else. Why don't we have other pro-capitalist art from the 20th century, significant pro-capitalist art from the 20th century that had anything like the power of Ayn Rand? That can only be explained by her ideas and how she integrated her ideas with her art. But right over his head. But so rah that she's being emotional about capitalism, because I think capitalism is for utilitarian grounds. Mind you, he's just getting into a utilitarian type argument, never thinking that, Ayn Rand had something to say about utilitarianism. It doesn't even occur to him. And that maybe her emotional appeal might have something to do with the profound argument she has about the relationship between the moral and the practical. No. He just is layering the error upon error upon error from his original ignorance. And it is as though he's never cracked an Ayn Rand book, or comprehensively read it at least, or a page of it at least.
Now continuing with the last paragraph, modern criticism of capitalism persists because emotions rather than facts and figures tend to sway public opinion. That's why Rand was so concerned about the negative portrayal of entrepreneurs in Hollywood films. She even wrote a 12... first I want to mention this about sort of emotions rather than facts tend to sway public opinion. Because again, it's not emotions specifically, it's morality or the predominant morality. I mean, back, if you went in the past, I mean, even the fact that you have in America sort of this some sort of implicit I mean, for free speech, for example, the fact that you have like this implicit, at least, argument for free speech, and sort of both sides, well, when they try to get rid of free speech, try to argue it from the standpoint of free speech, that again, those might be emotional, those might be, but they come from a certain predominant morality that are currently in the culture. So again, I mean, my question would be, what is he even offering as a solution? Is he saying like Ayn Rand is in a sense wrong in trying to go not from the emotional standpoint, but from saying we need to change the whole morality, we need to change the way we think about it? Like, clearly the fact everybody's seen the North Korea versus South Korea at night picture, and some people, it might convince some people, but it hasn't convinced the world.
And notice his approach by non-essentials. Yes, Ayn Rand was concerned about the way capitalism, freedom, and businessmen were presented in Hollywood movies. Absolutely. But in Atlas Shrugged, so many of her villains are big business people, are big business tycoons, are her villains. And you can imagine a different kind of art that would make a big businessman the hero, but he turns into this complete altruist who decides to give all his money and realizes that what he did was simply give him the resources to help other people. Ayn Rand would be opposed to certain kinds of portrayals of entrepreneurial heroes, and she would not simply make big business people heroes. I mean, again, the superficiality, his lack of understanding of Ayn Rand is really remarkable. And now here we are, more than 40 years after Ayn Rand's death. She's still popular. She's still causing articles to be published in the Wall Street Journal, and people are still not grasping the first element of her ideas, much less going into the deep dive that's required, because she was a profound philosopher as well as a profound artist. And all he's focused on there is the art and Ayn Rand's concerns about Hollywood propaganda. Well, there were a bunch of socialists and communists in Hollywood in the 30s and 40s that she was very well aware of. It's those values, Russian immigrants, Russian Jewish immigrants from Hollywood were not unique to Ayn Rand. Only they were all involved in being socialists and attacking the businessman. Ayn Rand was a very unique person because of what she was thinking, because of the values that she was promoting, because of the philosophical argumentation that lies underneath her art.
Now continuing, she even wrote a 12-page guide for Hollywood producers in 1947 demanding that they avoid communist ideology and refrain from attacking individual rights, individual freedom, private action, private initiative, and private property. No one understood humans' emotional urges better than Rand, the high priestess of reason. So ending, this is the end of the article, sort of ending it with...
Isn't that strange? If you understand emotions so intimately, you couldn't, that's inconsistent or unexpected or paradoxical from someone who advocates reason. On the face of it, he's again just simply repeating his stupid ignorance of Ayn Rand or dishonest lie about her work. But he's not getting it. And from the article, all you can say is, boy, does this man not get the first idea of Atlas Shrugged or the thrust of Ayn Rand's philosophy at all. He's so detached from it. To him, that this paradox is built in. It is a contradiction, an unresolvable contradiction. And apparently, Ayn Rand never even addressed the false dichotomy as a false dichotomy or what he calls a contradiction as an alleged contradiction. She did a lot. It was one of the major thrusts of her work, which really shows the really stupidity of the article, the irresponsibility. It is poor scholarship. It is bad journalism. It is false. It's logically fallacious, and it completely misrepresents her philosophy.
We have a super chat from Robert. Thank you so much. He says, good discussion. Thank you. Sadly, I've reached a point where I have more respect for the New York Times than the Wall Street urinal. Yeah, I mean, whenever I read the articles, I usually don't even check who I'm really reading it from. So they all sort of blend in together for me. So I have no necessary sort of like separation between them. So I cannot judge on that. But James,
conservatives, though, do have there's a variety of conservatives that have a hatred and ignorance of Ayn Rand on a deep level, and in one sense, at least as a deep a level as anyone on the left does. And this is another common misunderstanding. Ayn Rand was anti-conservative in this way because they generally come at it from a religious or intrinsicist standpoint, and that means, of course, they are up to their earlobes in false dichotomies, and they can't even. To them, those dichotomies, those contradictions, as he puts it, are just axiomatic parts of reality. They can't even imagine anything different. Even if Ayn Rand writes and writes and writes against it, stands on her head against it, makes the whole theme of Atlas Shrugged is the role of the mind in human survival, human existence, that collapsing all those distinctions, theory, practice, reason, emotion, you name it. That's the thrust of Atlas Shrugged, is to transcend those dichotomies. And you'd never get a hint of it from this guy's treatment of Ayn Rand or her works, either as a person or as a novelist, much less as a nonfiction philosopher, which you get no idea that she was even as one of those. Incredible.
Just quickly, because some people in the chat were arguing about anarchism and objectivism. Someone says objectivism is simply the application of primacy of existence to all fields of philosophy. It is not whatever Rand said. Objectivism is the philosophy of Ayn Rand. If you want to integrate anarchism with objectivism, whatever that means, you can call it sort of your own thing, but it's not what Ayn Rand said. It's not what Ayn Rand believed it. And, again, it doesn't mean that, sort of cult-like, you have to now agree. You can disagree with Ayn Rand, but call it something different. Why would you want to sort of bring in the sort of ideas of Ayn Rand and sort of said, no, she would have actually supported this. Just, there's nothing wrong with coming up with new things. Ayn Rand didn't call her philosophy Aristotelianism. She understood there is a difference between what I'm saying and what Aristotle said.
Absolutely. And an even stronger one between earlier rights theorists like Locke. She was saying something different. You can, and objectivism, by the way, is more than just the primacy of existence. Objectivism has, she's got a theory of concept formation, measurement omission for unit economy. She has a theory of volition that was never considered before. She has all kind, and she herself applied her philosophical principles to a critique of anarchist thinking. And
Yeah,
so
I
if
mean,
you're
even her theory of rights is, I think, unique to pretty much anything we've seen
absolutely,
before.
absolutely, where she defined the violation of rights was different even from the earlier classical liberals like Locke or Mill or Thomas Jefferson. She refined those arguments and created a whole new foundation for those arguments and a whole new refined application of how we can know when those rights are violated, unlike any of the previous classical liberal thinkers. So you can say I was influenced by Ayn Rand, but make sure you say this isn't objectivism. Ayn Rand believed her philosophy was inconsistent with anarchism. If you are going to be honest, at least more honest than this guy in the Wall Street Journal, and think of it, this guy in the Wall Street Journal has no idea of her theory of concepts, her theory of volition, the primacy of existence, her discussion of individual rights. None of that. Just whoop, doesn't even exist as far as he's concerned, which is grossly unfair and inaccurate, and would be relevant to his point about whether Rand was contradicting herself by advocating reason and being an artist who had emotional, passionate beliefs and values. It's pathetic.
As Chandler points out, didn't she choose the name because existentialism was taken? I believe that's true, and I do like existentialism a bit more because I think it's a bit more accurate way of describing what objectivism really is. But that name was taken by a very different and bad
I
philosopher.
prefer the term objectivism. I'm glad it was objectivist. Now, you could say existentialism because that would at least get to the most fundamental root, but that would not begin to explain, when we're talking about definition, what is the essence? What explains most about it? I would say it's Ayn Rand's unique approach to the trichotomy, intrinsicism, subjectivism, objectivism. Her unique understanding of what it is to be objective is what most fundamentally distinguishes her system of thought from every other before hers, in my view. See, to a certain extent, she shared the primacy of existence with Parmenides and Aristotle, with whom she had differences. But we can argue about what the best name is. But think of it, just in our
we cannot argue. It's a cult. We just have to agree.
Ayn Rand, at least she did consider existentialism as a name, but she landed on objectivism, and I'm kind of glad she did.
And just to wrap up, someone says, Peikoff said that Aristotle deviated from Aristotelianism. How is that possible? Anything to say on that before we wrap up?
Well, Aristotle was deeply influenced by his teacher Plato, and so there were still Platonic elements. And so the fundamental revolution that is Aristotle still had elements of non-Aristotelian thought within it. If Aristotle was to be consistent and purify his thought, it wouldn't have had such views as sort of, we were talking about essence, intrinsic essence. He might have been able to avoid that, but I'm not sure that's true. When someone can tell me that a philosophical principle of Ayn Rand's is inconsistent with her other basic principles or the thrust of her philosophy, then I would entertain a similar thing about Ayn Rand, but I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of any philosophical principle. That's not the same as all of Ayn Rand's beliefs, opinions, preferences, which are very distinct from philosophy. Her philosophy is the integrated set of philosophical principles she developed, not the fact that she liked Rachmaninoff or skyscrapers. They're connected, don't get me wrong. With Ayn Rand, her emotions are intimately connected to her values, and her values intimately connected to her deeper ideas. But you don't have to love Rachmaninoff to be an objectivist, for example. But if you can find me an objectivist principle that is inconsistent with the others because she was relying on some earlier teacher, say Aristotle, then you could say the same about her. But I'm not aware of a similar thing. There's a kind of Platonic intrinsicism that you can find occasionally in Aristotle, sometimes on an important point, that is sort of a leftover. He didn't complete the Aristotelian revolution, if you will, within classical Athenian thought.
Yeah, but again, if Ayn Rand was wrong somewhere along the way she was developing her philosophy, we wouldn't call that the new thing objectivism. We would say
No, you say
objectivism.
objectivism made a mistake, and this principle of it was a contradiction to this other stuff. Right.
And with that, I think we've sort of sort of like Ayn Rand is full of contradictions. Also, our shows is because we violated the law of identity, and a 30-minute show was 1 hour 5. So with that, I guess the article was right. But no, I think we've covered it well enough, and I think I recommend the person who wrote this article about Ayn Rand. I really recommend checking out her books. I think
Yeah, actually, reading one of her books might be very helpful, or reading Leonard Peikoff's book about it might be helpful. I would recommend that people understand that this ad hominem biographical attack on Ayn Rand is always wrong. It is not only ad hominem, it is almost always based on false facts, and certainly non-essential ones about Ayn Rand's life. And they have their roots in what the Brandons did, attacking Ayn Rand. And so to say that, people have criticized me for focusing on Ayn Rand's the biographies, the early biographies, but they are the base, they are the foundation, they're the source of this stuff about smoking and her fear of flying and her that can be traced back to Barbara Brandon, for example. So, ladies and gentlemen, while we defend the essence, the thrust of our work in defending objectivism should be on the ideas, we should bear in mind Ayn Rand's life, because it is what is used so often as a substitute for a criticism of her ideas, when it is nothing but a giant ad hominem fallacy. We need to attack it both on that level, and we need to defend Ayn Rand to some extent as a human being. But, obviously that wouldn't justify or prove her philosophy, but at least it would diffuse this stupid, vicious attack on Ayn Rand's philosophy because of things in her personal life. I do think Ayn Rand was a virtuous person on balance. I think she was a happy person on balance. I think she had a remarkable life. That does not mean that I think she was perfect, didn't make mistakes, wasn't a human being, didn't learn things. And even in her own private notes to herself, Ayn Rand would admit making mistakes. I've read them. But Ayn Rand's biography is an important point, and I hope that Professor Milgram, her work on Ayn Rand, her biography of Ayn Rand, Shoshana's, comes out soon, because we need a decent biography of Ayn Rand, more than just a brief summary of her life. There's some earlier brief summaries, Jeff Britting, for example, even Alan Gotthelf in his introduction to Ayn Rand's book on Ayn Rand, but they're brief. We need an in-depth biography of Ayn Rand, one that is accurate, one that is fair, and one that we can cite in refutation to this nonsense.
We have a super chat from PC. Thank you so much. He says, James, my distant cousin who was a hostage is free today. I'm definitely glad to hear that. I was thinking if we should cover it. Thankfully, if we don't cover a hostage release, it usually means nothing went wrong. So in that way, I'm glad we don't have to cover. It's happy to see, but again, basically the hostage release went well, from my understanding. Nothing really bad happened. So I'm
very
glad for
sorry
that.
for what happened to your family, and I'm very happy that your cousin has been released and released alive. I hope that the treatment wasn't too horrific, but I'm very happy for you, and we will continue to discuss the hostage releases and the entire broader issue. So thank you.
And with that, thank you everybody for watching. I will be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective. Until then, thank you, James. Bye bye.
Good premises.